Okay, great. I'm just going to quickly go through this beginning thing, and this is kind of a continuation of a workshop that I did here called Improvisation for the Church Musician. This is kind of the second half of that stuff, the stuff that we couldn't really get to. We didn't have enough time. Okay? Now, there are two things that every musician should work with. Two things. Okay? Two things. One is your internal voice. The second is your external voice. And I'm going to give you some definitions. When I say internal voice, this is what I'm talking about. Everyone has original ideas. If you are a copy, then you're not necessary. So we'll assume that all of us have. We're all necessary beings, and we all have creativity. We all have original ideas. But what seems to happen is there seems to be a breakdown between having that idea and getting your instrument to play that idea. It seems to be the challenge. Okay? And everyone's goal is to be able to sing through their instrument. When we talk about singing, your vocal cords are actually attached to your body. So we're talking about a real physical kind of connection that you have, a spiritual connection to your instrument. Okay, so because of this, you get an idea, you try to play the idea, and either you just totally miss the boat on the idea, or you play something that's kind of around the area of the idea, but it's not really what the idea is. Okay? The way to fix that problem is by mastering the instrument. Okay, so in other words, there's no easy way to get there. I don't have a blue pill or a red pill that you can take and decide to, be outside of the matrix. Right? I don't have any formula like that. Okay, you can't take the blue pill or the red pill. But what you can do is you can practice. That's definitely something that we have control of. So turning up the volume. I talk about turning up the volume. So you're trying to turn up the volume on the idea that's in your head so that it's louder than the sound of the instrument that you're playing. Okay, so that your concept overpowers the instrument, not that the instrument overpowers you. Okay? All right, so turn up the volume. This is why we practice scales, rudiments, patterns, and every possible note combination. Okay, that's why people practice things. Now, sometimes the teacher will teach you, I've had some teachers that tried to teach me a certain way, or am aware of teachers that teach this way, I should say that way. And that is to show you some scales and some licks and some patterns that will work on certain chord changes, and then call that improvisation. It's not improvisation. Okay, now it's easier to teach someone how to play that way. Grab this lick. Okay? It's easier to sound like you have good musicianship to do that. But that's not really true musicianship. Okay? So that's why we practice things. External voice. Let's talk about your external voice. So internal voice is basically your ability to play your own ideas. Okay? It's your ability to hear an idea and just play it on your instrument. Sing through your instrument. That's your internal voice. External voice is all the stuff that happens outside of your control. Okay? Now, it may very well be that if I'm a total master of my instrument, I have no limitations by my instrument, my improvisation might still sound like noise to everyone else because it has no relationship to what anybody else is doing. So we have to bridge that gap also. Okay, so it's like this. Say, for instance, if I'm a Spanish scholar, linguistic scholar, and Charles is a French linguistic scholar. Okay, I've got 25,000 word vocabulary. He's got 30,000 word vocabulary. Neither one of us are limited by our language. We can say anything we want to say. Okay? That's great until we try to communicate. Because unless we have a vocabulary in common, there's nothing that we can say to each other. Does that make sense? So, if I'm trying to become a better gospel musician, I should listen to. If I'm trying to become a better jazz musician, I listen to If I want to become a better classical musician, I listen to, okay, now, when I moved to this town, about, I don't know, what was it, five years ago or something now, when I moved here, and I was trying to recreate a couple of bands that I played, a couple of my bands that I played original music in, and then also play standards and things like that. It was very important to me to be able to quickly locate some musicians that could play those styles. And the way that I located those musicians was based on the kind of music that they listened to mostly. So if I wanted to, if I knew that my group was a traditional jazz group, I'm not going to go over to a rock and roll bar and try to find some rock and roll musicians because they won't understand the vocabulary. They won't be able to speak the language. Okay, and then it won't sound authentic. It'll sound like rock and roll musicians trying to play jazz. And the same thing happens, jazz musicians trying to play gospel. They sound like jazz musicians. They don't sound like gospel musicians. Okay, and so it became very, very important to me to be able to play several different styles. Not just to be able to play other instruments, but to be able to play authentically within every style that I play. And so I found that for me personally, being able to play the other styles and then the interactions between the styles is a great way to make yourself a stronger musician. Because there are strong points and weak points in practically every art form. If you learn a lot of different kinds of music, then you're going to be learning along with some of the weak points. You're going to learn some of the strong points, which is going to make your overall musicianship stronger. Now, I'm not talking about subjectively strong. I'm talking about objectively strong. Okay? Objectively strong. And a lot of times we get very subjective with music. You know, it's just how, I just like the way that he plays because he just plays with so much feeling. Okay, well that's great, and that is a quality of the music. But if you put any chord changes in front of him, he can't play it. He doesn't know how to, play it. Or if you put a piece of sheet music in front of him, that'll apply it real fast. So all of us have strengths and weaknesses in our musicianship. And it's okay to say, okay, my weakness is I'm not a great reciter. Or my weakness is I'm not a great improviser. Or my weakness is I don't really know anything other than country music songs. But whatever your weakness is, you have to be willing to locate whatever the weaknesses are, be honest with yourself, and then specifically work on things that will improve those. I talk to my students all the time about the concept of don't perform in the practice room. Don't perform in the practice room. Well, this is the difference between performance and practice. Okay, say if F major scale is, I'm the master of F major scale. Matter of fact, I'm such a master at F major scale that I can sympathetically make my instrument resonate F major scale without touching it. Mind control of F major scale. Just a total master of F major scale. But F sharp major scale gives me trouble. If I'm sitting in the practice room, the time that I call practice, and I'm playing F major scale, that's called performance. If I play F sharp major scale, that's called practice. And so the more time you actually practice, the better you'll get. The more time you perform in the practice room, the more you'll stay the same. It's a very simple principle. Now, the problem with the principle is that it is hard to do. It's hard to do. The thing about being very disciplined is it's hard to be very disciplined. It's hard to go in the practice room and always play stuff that you have a hard time with. Why? Because we all want to sound good. Let alone if where you practice is within earshot of someone else. Right? Because now we want to impress people instead of actually sitting there and actually working on some stuff that we're struggling with. So don't fall into it. That's the easiest thing to fall into. All of us do it. The more you don't do that, the better you'll be off. Okay? The better off you'll be. Okay, so vocabulary. Constant listening to the kinds of music that you're trying to get more proficient in. Constantly listening to it. Get used to all kinds of different kinds of music. One thing that happens sometimes is, and unfortunately, historically, a lot of this has come over the pulpit, but of course this is not the case here. And that is the concept that the only music that is of any quality or any value is gospel music. Everything else is worldly music or devil's music, or there's no redeeming qualities inherent within those musical forms. That kind of attitude. And I think what's happened is that's actually stunted the growth of a lot of musicians that came up under that kind of attitude about other music forms. But I'll tell you this, that when we talk about early Christianity, I'm not talking about early African American church, not in this country. I'm talking about 33 AD, early Christianity. When I say that, there was a much different concept about music, about arts. Okay, so right now, a lot of people function with a kind of a dichotomy, and that is you have secular and you have sacred music. Okay, sacred music, secular music. Back in the day, it was not like that at all. The concept was that anything that's beautiful glorifies God. Anything that is beautiful glorifies God. Very simple, very basic concept. Now, there was a definite difference between liturgical music and its specific purpose for liturgical music, but there was never needed to make declarations that other kinds of music forms are less godly or that you can't worship using that form. I have to say that every time I touch my instrument is a form of worship. Every single time I touch my instrument. When I'm in the practice room practicing, it's worship. When I'm in front of people, even if I play in a club, and this might sound weird, but even when I'm playing in a club, it's worship. Because I always play from the same place. Okay? So I think the thing is being willing to really check out other music forms, really dig into them deeply. That's really going to help you a lot. Okay. So one of the things with developing your external voice is the ability to literally repeat back whatever was just played on the spot, immediately. You have to be able to do that. One of the things they do in marriage counseling, everybody knows about this, right? You probably heard this example. One of the things that they do in marriage counseling is you have Susie, you have Tom, okay? Susie and Tom, right? Susie sitting in the chair, they're facing each other, right? Counselor says, hey, Susie, tell Tom what it makes you feel like when he ignores you on Sundays, during football games. And then she goes on, oh, well, it's awful. You just get locked in on that 50-inch 1080p high definition television, and you just play no attention. It just really is terrible. I can't take it. Okay? All right. And then, now what's really bad about this is that when the counselor says, okay, Tom, repeat back what she just said, the jive turkey can't say anything she said, except for 1080p, 50-inch, something about football. That's the only thing you can say. Okay? Now, all of us know people that when you're talking to them, you're having a deep conversation, they say something way out in left field, and you're like, oh my gosh, where did you come up with that, right? And if they do that enough times, then we kind of distance ourselves from them, right? It's like, I don't know about that cat. That's kind of a weird cat. I think I'm gonna, right? So we become friends with other people, these people that are talking the same language that we're talking, right? But the thing is that that's what's happening in music almost all the time. Almost all the time. Somebody plays something, the other person, because they can't conceive of what's happening even, they have to say something that's totally out of a different bag, or totally has nothing to do with what was just stated. That's not communication. So it can't be musical. And that's a rough standard, but that really is the standard. So it doesn't matter what musical style it is. The goal should be to be able to repeat back literally whatever was just played. Shouldn't matter what instrument, shouldn't matter whatever it is. Doesn't matter. Okay, and so I spent a lot of time developing my ear. And of course, out of the gospel tradition, one of the really strong positive things is there's a lot of very strong ear players. Very strong ear players. People that can pick stuff up very quickly. And, that's definitely an asset. But one of the weaknesses, another one of the strengths is the fact that there's a lot of strange keys that songs end up being. It's not just an F or an B flat, friendly keys, G and C and stuff like that. Those are friendly easy keys. But stuff in C sharp and F sharp, and A flat, just keys that are not necessarily common keys. So that's a definite strength. But sometimes what the weakness is because people are leaning so far onto their ear that a lot of times, a lot of gospel musicians tend to lean so hard on that they don't develop other aspects of their musicianship. So you don't want to fall into that. And one of the ways not to fall into that is to do some sight reading on a regular basis. Even if you feel like you're terrible at sight reading, you can't read at all, it doesn't matter. And eyesight reading. And in fact, what makes a great sight reader is not some kind of omniscience of what's going to happen next. It's not some kind of weird skill that just some people have. What makes a great sight reader a great sight reader is that it's not really sight reading. Now let me explain what I mean by that. The great sight reader has seen so much music that there's no combination of notes or rhythms that they haven't seen. That's what makes a great sight reader. It's that simple. So all you have to do is just go to the music store, purchase a book. All you're going to do out of that book is just sight reading. Do it for maybe 5 or 10 minutes every day you practice. Go through maybe 2 or 3 pages. Force yourself to get through it at a consistent tempo. Choose something that is challenging, but that is not something that you have no hopes of being able to play. And turn the metronome on. Make yourself get through it. Even if you're making mistakes, stay right where you're supposed to be. Okay? Okay, so sight reading. Now I have some things on here I'm not going to talk about under the external voice section about transcribing and some ear training stuff. And at a later date, we can go back and kind of talk a little bit about what some of those things are. But I think you're getting the idea of what's coming next. Organizing your practice. This is a challenge. Organizing your practice is very challenging. Now, it's simple, but because it's discipline, it's hard. Okay? We were talking, and I said something in the last session about liturgy. Now, liturgy literally means the work of the people. The work of the people. And that implies that there's going to be a challenge. And if you've ever been to a liturgical service, there's a very organized, very discipline specific thing that's going on during the service. Okay? And it's work. There's a lot of standing up for the whole time. It can be work. If you've ever been to a really, really old church, and when I say that, I'm talking about 9th century, 10th century, 11th century, like that. A lot of those churches, traditional churches, there's no pews. Okay? There's a row of pews that are on the side of the church. Okay, on the side of the church. Everybody stands up. When the preacher is preaching, they sit on the floor. Okay? And the expectation is that you will stand up for the whole time. But if you start to get physically weak, or if you're elderly or something wrong with your knee or something, you can walk over and you can sit down for a while, but then you need to get back up and join the rest of the congregation. Okay, that's a totally different kind of concept. It's totally countercultural from coming to churches that have comfortable seating, sweep seating, and the church is set up basically like a concert venue with very comfortable seats. It's a totally different kind of thing. Now, I'm going to say this, and that is that in the West, it seems to be that there is a kind of a creeping in type of attitude that if you're supposed to be doing something, if you're called to do something, if that's your purpose in life, then it's supposed to be easy. Right? It's supposed to just be natural. And there's arisen this kind of dichotomy between quote-unquote trained players and natural players. I don't even know what that is. Okay? I don't know what it is. You know, it's like, oh, when such a plays, oh, it's just like they just play with a certain kind of rawness. Well, rawness is a skill too. That's a skill too. You know, and if you practice, it's not going to take away what you already have, so long as you continue to do the things that you're already doing. Okay? All right, great. So organizing your practice. Now, the reason I said that thing about liturgy and about the discipline and all like that is because in my practice routine, there's a very specific, organized, regimental type of things happening. And this is also one of the reasons that I can say when I'm in the practice room, it really is a worshipful type of thing that's happening. And I'm really giving myself to the music. I really am doing the warm-up, tone development, rudiment, sight reading, sight transposition. Obviously, unless you're a horn player, tone development isn't on the list. But when I say tone development, I'm talking about stuff like long tones. You know, I'm talking about stuff like harmonic series drills, all of that kind of stuff. Sight reading, sight transposition. Okay, now sight transposition, that's like the second step to sight reading. Second step to sight reading. Say, for instance, if you feel pretty strong about your sight reading, okay, I'm getting to be a pretty good sight reader. Okay, now it's time to start sight reading, but then transposing at the same time. One of the regular things that I have to do is I have to read a concert chart. Tenor saxophone, any B-flat instrument that I play, soprano saxophone, I have to read a concert chart of the whole step. I have to do that all the time. When we were in rehearsal the other day, I was reading a B-flat part on flute, which meant I had to transpose it down the whole step. Just trying to show regular musical, regular opportunities to use that skill. You know, times that you have to be able to use that skill. Lots of times, I play alto saxophone. Alto is actually my main instrument. That's my primary instrument. That's the instrument that I started with. It's alto saxophone. On alto saxophone, I'll have to read a concert part. I have to read the down a minor third or up a major sixth. Sometimes I'll get a bass clef part. And I'll have to read either bass clef on flute, right? Which is strange, but you know, I can do that. I worked on doing that, learning how to do that. Or sometimes I'll have to read a bass clef part on alto saxophone, which almost is the same, would be the same notes, except for a different key signature. So there's a bunch of those kinds of things that you can continue to work on to continue to develop yourself as a better musician. There's infinite possibilities. As soon as you really devote yourself to really practicing, there's so much stuff to practice. It's not really a question of people knowing what to practice. I think a lot of times, all of us at some time have played the game of saying, oh, the reason I don't practice, I just don't know what to practice. No, yeah, you do. You practice whatever you can't play. That's practice. It's the simplest thing in the world. Practice what you can't play. Great. The second thing, etudes and transcriptions. Again, we can talk about that at a later date when I have more time. Transcribing. That should be a regular part of your practice routine. Transcribing. But I mean, we learn up here. We learn tunes right here all the time. That's great. But I'm talking about solo transcriptions. I'm talking about Charles. Like, say, if you checked out somebody like Kenny Kirkland, or even Chick Corea, or Mo Vermillion, or any of those guys, or if you wanted to go back further, Oscar Peterson, or Herbie Hancock, and transcribe. And when I'm saying transcribing right now, I'm talking about learning by ear the exact solo line and voicings that are being used. That's gonna really improve musicianship. You know, to be able to hear that and then to be able to execute some of the technical stuff that's going on. There's a lot of really challenging piano stuff in all those players. Those are all like virtuoso players. So that's going to make you have to, you know, be able to play your instrument at a higher level. Okay. Improvisation. Now I'm going to show some specific things to work on for improvisation and for rudiments. So we'll talk about that in a second. Repertoire and performance preparation. Now, repertoire. Repertoire, that's how many tunes you know, basically. You know, one thing that I can't stand is I go to a jam session. I might go to a jam session. This is another thing. People going to jam sessions. That's great. I mean, there's two good jam sessions in town that have been going on for a long time. There's one on Tuesday night, and it goes from about 8 to 11. And then there's one on Saturdays from 5 to 9. The 8 to 11 Tuesday night is at Park Street Tavern. And a lot of people show up for that, you know, consistently. It's a great opportunity to play. Learn some tunes, then you can go up and actually request to play the tune that you want to play. And you can actually be playing with other musicians that are kind of on the same journey, trying to become better jazz musicians, right? So that's a great opportunity. The real jam session for me is the one on Saturdays that Reggie plays at with Bobby Floyd. That's 5 to 9 at the lobby. And Bobby is just ridiculous. We'll sit there and listen to him for one set, and then after that he starts calling me to club. To me, that's the section. Okay? And in order to continue to make yourself a better musician, guess what you have to do? You have to put yourself in uncomfortable positions. You have to be willing. You have to be willing to be the weak person on the set. I'm serious. That was one thing that my father was adamant about, was having me play with musicians that were kicking my butt all the time. I mean, I started playing professionally when I was 9. But I was playing with like Rodney Whitaker, and I was playing with excellent, great musicians. Everybody. You know, everybody was handing me my hand. I mean, it was pretty serious. And so that's how I developed quicker. And part of it was because I was inspired by the musicianship of these musicians that were around me. But then the other part of it was the information that I could get from them. Because I could ask them questions. They just play something, oh man, what was that? Always be interactive with the music. If something ever happens in a musical situation that you have live bodies, it's a shame if you don't ask them what it was that they just played. Why wouldn't you do that? Because you're only stunning your own growth if you don't understand what is going on and you don't ask the person. They're standing right there. They can show you what it is, and for whatever reason you don't ask. It doesn't make any sense. And so you have to be humble. You have to be humble. You have to be, the kind of people I don't like playing with are the people that they play something. I'm like, oh man, what was that? And they either play it real fast so then I can't hear what it is. Like I had a couple cats that would deal with that, or they just won't show it to me. Nah, man, you have to figure that out on your own. So as soon as they do that, I don't hire them. It's because I'm not trying to stunt my own growth by playing with somebody that's stingy. But there's no stingy people here. But none of us are stingy. All of us want to share the information that we have and are willing to share. So there's no reason not to ask. I mean, I took a drum lesson with Reggie. I got a lot of stuff to practice. And Reggie didn't even charge me. You know, but you understand what I'm saying? We was over there for like 2 hours. It was about 2 hours, between when you got there and set the drums up and then showing me a bunch of stuff. We were there for about 2 hours. There's no person in here that wouldn't be willing to just donate their time to help somebody. So that's what has to happen. If that doesn't happen, then the rest of it is just talk. It's just talk. I want to be a better musician, but then you don't ask anybody. you have to deal with it.
I just wanted to jump in real quick and brought up a really good point. And I think, I don't know about anybody else, but I know I grew up in church, and just like what he's saying is, my experience has been, probably a lot of us, where there was an older generation before us, where, if you're an organ player, you look and see what the organ player was doing, and all of a sudden he's like, or you look at the drummer, he's like, he play a lick, and then you look over, and then, he just goes back to playing simple. But I think the opportunity that we have right now is to be a new generation to completely demolish and destroy that attitude.
Absolutely.
And what he's talking about is so key for all of us that we can stop the cycle of gospel musicians who can only play gospel music or can't read or they're locked into a box. And I think this is just a great opportunity for us to take advantage of it.
Right. It's like as soon as people really catch on to it, really practicing, really being open with information, and just really researching stuff and looking into different players and getting excited about that, that's infectious. That grows. That becomes bigger than that old stale type of attitude that people have. That's just, it's a lot. Right? Okay, great. Let's go to the next thing. 3 rehearsals. That's right, 3 rehearsals. There are 3 rehearsals, and it's a pyramid. Okay? It would be like a triangle, and there's 3 sections. The bottom section of the triangle, that's personal practice. Personal practice. In the middle of the triangle, that's called sectional rehearsals. Okay? For us, that would be band rehearsal. The top, large ensemble rehearsal. That's when the choir and the band gets back together. Okay? Now, fortunately, the way that we're set up right now, rehearsal-wise, is that the vocalists actually do sectional rehearsals. There's almost no church that deals with that. Not very many, we'll put it that way. That's not the norm. Bands typically will rehearse by themselves, but not usually choir members. So, what we have to put on ourselves is that we need to really be slammed when we come back to that large ensemble rehearsal. Because they're rehearsing. So we can no longer use the large ensemble rehearsal to learn the music or to get some licks together that are in the music. That's not acceptable. That's not, it is, we talk about, giving God an excellent praise, and we talk about all of these kinds of things, and that's not possible to do if everybody's not coming with it. The number one thing that you have to do to come with your A game is personal practice. Personal practice. Got to do it. Personal practice should have 2 components. One, as it says in part D of the practice routine, is performance preparation. That is to learn the songs, to make sure that you really know them. Not just barely can play them, but really know them. The other component of practice is, of course, is the building your overall musicianship. You're trying to become a better musician. The better musician you become, the faster it will be to get that music together. Okay? Your band is only, here's a misconception. The misconception is that, say for instance, I talk to high school bands a lot. And I talk to high school bands, and I try to trap them as much as I can. Get people to buy in and raise their hand, and then I swoop down like right? But one of the things that I talk to them about, I say, look, how many of you love music? I'm gonna get you two. How many? How many people love music? Come on now. Come on. Everybody should have their hands up. Right? All right. Now, here's the deal with love. All right? Love is a commitment. Love requires sacrifice. The way you can tell how much you love something is how much you're willing to give up for it. Now, usually I'm not going to say this to you guys because we know we're all serious musicians, but what I usually say to them is that you should really substitute a different word for love. You should say, I kind of like music. Music is all right. That would be a better description of the way that their schedules actually work in relationship to how much time they're spending practicing, making themselves a better musician, even listening to music if they're not familiar. Most of us spend more time watching TV, on the cell phones, getting on the computer. We spend more time doing that stuff than we do spend improving ourselves as musicians. I mean, say for instance, Lori and I just got married, right? We've been married since January, about 7 months, just a little over 7 months. Okay, say for instance, if a couple weeks after we got married, I was back over here playing, and then I was working the audience. In other words, I was trying to find some young ladies in the audience to hang out with, right? But I told Laurie, I love my wife. I love my wife. It doesn't seem to reflect in my behavior, right? So that's what's actually happening when you say you love something, but you don't demonstrate that love in your day-to-day schedule by time spent. So part of this is about just being brutally honest with ourselves, really about what our priorities actually show what our love for is. Okay? Great. So the 3 rehearsals: personal practice and sectional rehearsal, large ensemble rehearsal. If the large ensemble rehearsal goes bad, it's because the sectional rehearsals went bad. If the sectional rehearsals went bad, it's because people aren't practicing. Everything falls on that bottom. So this is how you don't have to worry about being the strongest musician. Don't have to worry about that. But what you can worry about, and what you can spend time working on, is making sure that you're not the weakest musician. And everybody can control that. And the way you can control that is by always being prepared. You always know the music. You're on top of everything. You're asking all kinds of questions. Heck, you're bugging me. You're asking some of the questions. To make sure that you know what's going on. You're really improving as a musician. Okay? That's how you can make sure that you're not always be on time. That's another big one. To be on time is to be late. To be early is to be on time. Okay, so always be on time. Early is what it's okay? So that's how you can control that. A lot of times I think we get distracted by a certain person's ability, like talent. It's like, oh, that's just such and so talented. And sometimes we forget that it is not the most talented, the best musician, musicians with the highest ability that can play the fastest or whatever it is. It's not that person that defines the band or that defines the choir. Guess who it is? It's the weakest one, because the weakest one determines what music you cannot play. That's the one that defines the band. So, don't be the weak one. So you don't have to worry about being the best one. Just worry about doing the best that you can. Being professional. Doing what you're supposed to do. That's all you can do. Great. Love means commitment. Focus versus tunnel vision. Fine. Don't perform in the practice room. We went over that. Discipline is the great equalizer. I've seen a lot of people that are very, very naturally, gifted. It's just amazing the kind of ability that they have. But I've seen on a regular basis those people get outdone by people that have kind of average ability, but that just practiced ridiculous practice, super disciplined, focused, just like a laser. Everything was just like it was supposed to be, and they weren't more on the scene. They can play more tunes. They know more tunes. They know more. See, there's no substitution for repetition. No substitution for repetition. That means that even if you are a person that has a lot of a natural ability, when I listen to someone, I can tell how much they practice. Now, when I say that, I'm not saying that I can hear it's mechanical and it sounds stale. I'm sorry, that it sounds sterile. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that I can hear the commitment in the music. Let me give you a good example of this. Charlie Parker, John Coltrane. Both of them ridiculous musicians. Okay? Charlie Parker totally changed music. So did Train. Totally changed music. Everything was different after Charlie Parker. Everything was different after John Coltrane. The two most important figures in jazz. If I had to say three, it would probably be Louis Armstrong, then it would probably be Charlie Parker and John Coltrane. Those would be the three most important, hands down, no question about it. Those are the guys. Okay? Charlie Parker was super, just like a naturally gifted musician. Totally naturally gifted. It was just ridiculous. He was like Mozart. Mozart could listen to your piece once and then sit back down at the piano, play the whole thing, but he would be correcting mistakes as he went on. That kind of thing. He was that kind of genius, maybe more of a genius than Mozart was. And he just had something. You heard Parker, you just knew you heard something that was just special. He just had something different than other people. Okay? John Coltrane, Jimmy Heath, another great tenor saxophone player. Jimmy Heath practiced with John Coltrane. And people asked Jimmy Heath questions. He said, man, Train must have just been all over you once and stuff, man. He must have just been like the baddest cat ever. Like, everything must have been easy to him, right? Everything must have been easy. And Jimmy Heath said, no, Train didn't have any more or any less than anyone else. He just practiced 12 hours a day. He practiced 12 hours a day. There's a box set called the Heavyweight Champion. It's all the Atlantic recordings of John Coltrane. If you don't have that or haven't heard it, you should get it. Okay? The Heavyweight Champion. If you open up the booklet, and it has a dictionary definition of the word practice. That's serious. That's real serious. That's real deep. That is super serious. That's like, I don't even want to deal with it. That's like it's too much stuff, man. That's too much. On your box set, you got a dictionary definition of the word practice? Get out of here. And the thing is every time I listen to John Coltrane, I can hear that commitment in his music. It's such a spiritual experience. Every time I hear it, it's every note is pointing to God because of that dedication that he has. Every single note. If you there's an album called Love Supreme, which is dedicated to the Christian God. Love Supreme. And I mean, every note that he ever played that I can hear, it's just, you can just see, it's just he's pointing. He's searching for God. And the way that he's searching for God is his dedication to the things that he has control of. And that is the music, the ability that he was given. But when I listen to Parker, although Parker, I mean, rhythm, harmony, melody, all the things that he changed, that stuff is great, but guess what? I don't hear the same level of spirituality in it. It's deep in its own right, but it doesn't have that spiritual dimension that when I listen to Train, what I get out of it. Practice makes ritual spiritual. All right, now I'm just going to show you guys a couple things to work on, kind of concrete concrete stuff. First thing I want to do is I'm going to improvise over the blues. There's a sheet there called Thunder's Blues, and it has the chord scales that fit over those particular chords. It's a jazz blues. Jazz blues, okay? And it happens to be the same progression that you're going to hear improvise on. The reason I'm big on learning how to improvise over the blues is because the blues have every fundamental thing harmonically that you're going to find in music. So the person that really has mastered being able to improvise over the blues, I mean, they can play a whole lot of stuff. 90% of musical forms are based on blues. Okay? Maybe higher than that. 95% of music forms are based on the blues. So it's a great fundamental place to really start getting used to what's happening. Okay? Now, at the bottom of the sheet, it says to improvise using the minor pentatonic or the blues scale. Right? Minor pentatonic or blues scale. So what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to improvise for a while, and we'll see what happens with that. And then I'm going to slow down and just kind of show you a couple things that are going on.
B flat. 1, 2. 1, 2, 3, 4.
ways that we can attack this. One of the things is by playing what's called a canvas approach. A canvas approach of the chord changes. You know, when I say canvas approach, I mean we're basically taking a paintbrush, the same color on it, and we're just doing this over the canvas. All right? Without respect to where I am on the canvas, without respect to if I'm doing lines or circles or, you know, spacing or anything, it doesn't matter. Okay, so this is a canvas approach. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play just minor pentatonic. The minor pentatonic, I'm going to play the blues scale. The blues scale is, and I'll say this in concert pitch, is B flat, D flat, E flat, E, F, A flat, B flat. B flat, B flat, D flat, E flat, E, F, A flat, B flat. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to improvise just using those notes. I'm not even paying any attention to where I am on the form. I'm just going to play just those notes over the whole form.
B flat. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Canvas chords. I wasn't paying any attention to where I was in the form. Played those notes, and those notes sounded good everywhere in the form. Okay? Second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to play minor pentatonic scale over the form. Minor pentatonic. Now, actually, the blues scale is a minor pentatonic scale with an added note. The added note in the blues scale, which is E natural, that E natural is a sharp 11th scale degree. It's also called the blue note. It's called the blue note. All right? Now I'm going to remove the blue note from the blues scale, and it's going to become the parent scale, the scale that actually came from minor pentatonic. So B flat, D flat, E flat, F, A flat, B flat. Okay? So I'm going to do that. But I think you're going to notice that what I play, the character of what I play is going to kind of change for me.
B flat. 1, 2, 3,
5 notes. That was 5 notes. And played nothing but 5 notes. All right? Now, so, and the reason I like to demonstrate that is because never let anyone convince you that because you don't know a whole bunch of scales that you can't play that much stuff. You can play a whole lot of stuff with 5 notes. Okay? That's a lot of stuff. Okay, now, great. Now, what you have written on the page would be the next step in improvisation. That is, would be to memorize those scales and to play those scales or those modes in those particular measures and improvise only using those scales and those modes in those particular measures. All right? Now that's going to pose a different challenge because now you have notes that are right in one measure but wrong in the next measure. And that's where really getting close to what the chord changes are and understanding which scales fit on those chords. That's where that gets, that's where that really comes in. Good. Now let's move on over to some rudiments. A couple of rudiments I'm going to show you. The practice. A lot of people talk about practicing scales. Yeah. Mixolydian, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. E and then E flat, mixolydian, and then B flat.
Okay. Okay. So then, so that I can kind of apply E flat, mixolydian. Sorry.
That's it. Is it spelled out? That's right. Right. That's not the melody. Right. It says Thunder's Blues, and it might seem like that's the melody, those notes. No, but those are the, it's the scales. Okay. So here's some scales. Did that answer the question you straight? Okay. Here's some stuff to practice. Number 10, stuff to practice. Here's a bunch of different kinds of scales. You can find any information about these scales that I've written down here online. If you just did a search for major scales or for harmonic minor scales, if you have any question as to what these scales are, you can find it right online. Okay. Chromatic scales, major scales, harmonic major. A lot of people don't know what harmonic major, but harmonic minor, which would be harmonic major. So it's just substitute a major third for the minor third. And then there's augmented scales. Augmented scale is it's a minor third and a half step, and a minor third and a half step. Now that's actually the real Eastern scale. Harmonic minor is kind of a westernization of the augmented scale into a 7-note, scale that would fit more with, major scales, basically. Major modes. Okay. Whole tone scales. That's just all whole steps. Okay. Diminished, and you're going to have two versions of diminished and two versions of augmented. Augmented scale, minor third, half step, minor third, half step. Inverted augmented, half step, minor third, half step, minor third. Diminished, whole step, half step, whole step, half step. Inverted diminished, half step, whole step, half step, whole step, all the way up. Okay? Let's see here. Pentatonic scales. Now, with the pentatonic scales, it would be also useful to learn them starting on every note. So there's pentatonic modes. Minor pentatonic is the fifth mode of major pentatonic. Major pentatonic is 1, 2, 3, 5, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 5, 6. That's the, if I compared it to a major scale, it would be 1, 2, 3, 5, 6. It's like I'm skipping the fourth note and the seventh note. Okay? So it's going to sound. Okay, that's major pentatonic. But if I wanted minor pentatonic, if I wanted to play it based on the same scale, if I start on the fifth note, instead of playing, if I play, right? Blue scale, right? Okay, so that's it. Linear scale patterns. Linear scale patterns. First thing, you want to practice scales 2 octaves or full range. 2 octaves or full range. If you play piano, 2 octaves, because then it teaches you the right crossover to play the second octave the same way that you played the first octave. Okay? Both hands, right? If you're playing saxophone, a wind instrument, then I would suggest full range. Just pick a note that you feel comfortable with. It doesn't have to be screaming way in the altissimo range, although I do practice scales playing up into extreme altissimo range, but it's not for the same reason. So for this thing, pick a note like F or F sharp, just a comfortable note, and just play all the notes all the way up to that note, but then all the way down to the bottom of your horn, back up to the note. So for instance, if I was playing E flat major, so I went all the way back down to the bottom of my instrument and back up. 2 areas that are challenging on saxophone, the most challenging, are palm keys and spatula keys. So the more work on those areas, the better. Okay, that's great. Let's see here. Full range. Other linear patterns. When I say linear patterns, I'm talking about stuff like stuff like that. Stuff that's pretty linear. You're playing a succession of notes within the intervals that are naturally present within the scale. Okay? That kind of stuff. So there's all kinds of things you can do with that. Now, intervallic diatonic scale patterns. Okay, intervallic diatonic scale patterns. A lot of people play thirds. A lot of people do that. But how about inverting those things? How about saying, okay, let's alternate between playing. Right? Okay, that kind of thing. And then I'll say, okay, how about fourths? And how alternating that? How about fifths? Or sixths. Okay, so that gives you a ton of stuff to practice just with major scales. Okay, had enough of that with major scales? Perfected that with major scales? Do that with harmonic minor. Do it with melodic minor. Do it with diminished, whole tone. Do it with, you understand? There's so many possibilities of stuff to practice. It's not like there's some shortage here. There's no shortage. I think of stuff every day that I can't play. And so I just put it on the list. And I shared that. Okay, so some other things. Let me go over one other thing, and then we're going to get back into here. And that is what I call the 6 ways to play pattern. Oh, yes?
Just a quick thing, if you could talk about, you're talking about things to practice. You talk about when you know you've got something. Okay. You know what I mean? As opposed to, okay, I played that at 60 beats per minute, or, with metronome. Am I done?
Right. The first thing is you should constantly be speeding up the metronome. Okay? And you should constantly be pushing yourself. Even if I feel like I know D major scale, but if I can only play it at quarter note equals 60, then I probably don't really know the scale. So continue to push the envelope. That's one thing. Another thing is, I always talk to my students about something I call 3 times perfect. 3 times perfect. And that is the concept of taking something, and you haven't really mastered it until you can play it 3 times consecutively perfect. Not 3 out of 10. Okay? 3 times consecutively perfect. At whatever tempo. And if you know the song is going to be played at 250, but you've only practiced it 3 times consecutively perfect at 220, then you know you don't have it. Okay? One other thing to say, and that is sometimes, here's a real basic principle. This is a very important, if you get this principle, then you can go a long way. Okay? This next principle I'm going to tell you. And that is, anytime you're playing a new piece of music, or you might be sight reading something, you might be listening to a recording and trying to, to learn it off the recording, however you're coming about the music. What you need to do, first thing is you need to locate the difference between something that's very, very hard, something that's, it's kind of medium hard, and then something that's very easy. Okay? So very hard, about medium, and easy. Now, second thing is, don't even practice the stuff that's easy. Spend most of your time on the hard stuff. And the stuff in the middle, spend enough time to make sure that you can at least play. If you practice that way, you'll fly through music. You just learn all kind of new music. But part of the secret is being able to locate what the stuff that's going to pose the biggest challenge, and then being honest about it. Well, this part right here, I can't play that at all. Well, that's the stuff you got to practice most. Okay? So, something is perfect when it's perfect. Perfect means without flaws. In any way. In any way. If you can play that particular lick, but you can't play it in context, it's not perfect. Right? If you can play it, but every once in a while you get a grace note in there that you didn't want, that's not perfect. You know, one way to really be able to tell if you can play something real hard, it's really challenging, is to learn it in every key. We'll talk about that another day. But we'll get into 2-5-1s and turnarounds and all kinds of other things the next time we get together. And I'm going to talk to you about, I mean, if you thought that stuff was challenging, we're gonna go beyond it. We're gonna go beyond it, way beyond it. Huh? You know, I have a practice log book that I have make all my students fill out. They break, you know, when they come to a lesson with me, they have a book in their hand, you know, and the book has a practice log in it. It's very, very specific, all kind of details. And it's for 6 days. I encourage people to practice 6 days. Really leave it all out there for 6 days and then take a day off. Okay, kind of the Sabbath approach to practice. So 6 days on, 1 day off. That's what I tell them to do. And they come in my office and the thing is filled out. It's got the amount of time that they practice. They have it totaled up per section per week. Everything for one, you know, for 1 day, you know, like that. And my students all practice. I tell them that they're required to practice 3 to 4 hours, 6 days a week. That's the minimum. That is the minimum. They have to practice 3 to 4 hours, 6 days a week. If they don't do that, then they don't get a good grade. They come in my office, that's the first thing they do, they hand it to me. And I open it up and I look at it. And if it's right, cool. And I have some students, most of my students are real like this. I have a couple students, nope. You know, and they don't last very long. So I can talk to you about that and maybe give you something to base your practice log on. But you guys should make your own practice log. Just get a notebook and just fill out the kinds of stuff that you want to practice. That's all I did. I just made a thing up based on stuff that I thought was good for people to practice. That's all. Okay? So, all right. So we're gonna get going. Let's have some prayer here.